Welcome back to Mind Over Splatter. We're doing the Friday the 13th movies. This is Notes on Summer Camp Part 2. It wouldn't be a classic Friday the 13th if we didn't do an unnecessary and overlong recap of what happened in the previous installments. So just to resume, this whole thing started when a dude named Sean Cunningham, former theater director, struggling filmmaker, threw together a low-budget slasher movie in the Halloween mold. Was picked up by Paramount Pictures, was a big hit. Cunningham immediately retreated from the franchise, presumably toting a gigantic burlap sack with a dollar sign on it. Paramount Pictures continued to produce more movies with the son of the studio's president, Frank Mancuso Jr., as their point man for these. Cunningham's partner, Steve Miner, directed a couple of them. A couple more people directed 4 and 5. On the screen, the first movie, we're talking about a slasher set in a summer camp or abandoned summer camp out in the woods of New Jersey, where the counselors and trainers start getting killed by reveal Pamela Voorhees, a woman whose son drowned years ago at Camp Crystal Lake. And then in part 2, they introduce Jason, her son, who is not dead, he's alive, but he's killing more people. He kills more people in 3D in part 3, kills more people in part 4, and is definitively killed in part 5, involves a copycat killer instead. That's about where we're at. In terms of how we rank the movies, where we're at the halftime, my list was...
We're not even halfway yet, though. Right, we're at 5.
Well, we're halfway through our episode.
Okay.
At this breaking point, Friday 3 is my number 1. Part 4, the final chapter, is my number 2. Part 2 is my number 3. And the original Friday is my number 4, even though I still think it's really good. And all 4 of those are really good and way behind the others. And number 5 is number 5. Will, what was your list?
Well, it might be the final chapter, but it's always number 1 in my heart. Then I've got the original, and then number 2. Yeah, then 3, then 5.
And Sheldon, you were at...
I went number 2 to start, and then 4, and then 1, and then I put 5 just above 3.
All right, so that's where we are, and we're ready to head into part 6. Let's get it going. So this is Mind Over Splatter, a podcast about horror movies. We're on Patreon right now, so sign up on Patreon if you're interested in helping us out and getting access to bonus episodes. I'm Dylan. I'm drinking a beer from Le Castor. I often drink their beers in the podcast, so I'm going back to my roots here. Nice pale ale. Sheldon, how's it going?
Well, I'm doing good. I got an 8-pack of Busch, and I'm going to start with one Planesbreaker Hopped Wheat Ale from Banded Peak Brewing.
We're all reconnecting to our roots here. We've got Bush Boy back in the game.
I got my Busch.
Will, what's up?
Hey. Well, I'm leading off with a Tiger Milkshake IPA.
Oh, that sounds good.
That's from the Vessel Beer Co., based right here in Winnipeg.
So in addition to myself, Sheldon, and Will, we're also, later in the episode, I'm going to patch in a little bit of an interview with a professor of horror and comedy, Stella Castelli. It's just a fun name to say. Who's with the University of Zurich, who's talking about Freddy versus Jason and why it's a vaudeville movie. And that's pretty fun. So we're going to be going through the rest of the franchise, starting with part 6 and moving on through 7 and 8 and Goes to Hell and X and Freddy versus Jason. And we're going to cap things off with a remake. So we've got a lot more Friday and Jason to chew our way through here tonight. And by the time we get to the end, we're going to finally unveil our complete ultimate rankings of every Friday the 13th movie. Are you guys familiar with this thing that when people sometimes divide scary movies into terror movies and horror movies? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I do not.
Yeah, I know what you're after.
Yeah. Some people will say that like a movie that takes place in the real world or that involves things that could theoretically happen, like a psychopath with a knife chasing you through a house, that's a terror movie. And a movie that involves things that don't exist or that are not commonly accepted to exist, if we want to be more political about it. Movies that involve the supernatural, that involve ghosts, demons, zombies, aliens, whatever, those are horror movies.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so classic slasher movies in the psycho Halloween mold are terror movies. They more or less take place in the real world, about the terror of things that could potentially theoretically happen to you. Basically, all the early slasher movies in the golden age of like 78 to 83, these are all terror movies. I bring this up because Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, is really the moment where the franchise leaps the barrier from terror movies to horror movies, and maybe clears a shark or two on the way over, depending on how you look at it. So after Part 5, Frank Mancuso Jr., who's producing these movies for Paramount, he wants to make some changes. Part 5 came in for some criticism. All the movies came in from criticism from the mainstream critics. We know that. We've covered it exhaustively. Don't worry, I'm not going to be reviving the Siskel and Ebert conversation. We're done with that.
Good.
Not sending any reanimating lightning bolts their way. They were leaving that dead and buried. But what was different about Part 5 was that some of the fans were also really upset about the movie too. Some people were upset that the movie was just like not fun, or it felt kind of grim and seedy. And of course, they're upset because it didn't fucking have Jason in it. Even though Jason was very, very thoroughly killed, they wanted a fucking Jason movie. So Frank Mancuso Jr. wants to make a new movie that's going to be more fun and that is going to somehow bring Jason back. Tom McLaughlin, this guy was pinballing around Hollywood, taking odd jobs, doing whatever he could. He actually got an Emmy nomination in 1977 for his work writing for a Dick Van Dyke TV special. He did a little bit of acting. There was only 2 real big Hollywood movies that he had acting roles in. One was Black Hole, that Disney Star Wars knockoff kind of movie. Yeah. He played a mute robot general in that. And have you guys seen Prophecy from 1979?
No.
It's a mutant bear monster is what it is. It's a creature feature. It's in the woods of the Pacific Northwest. It was actually directed by John Frankenheimer, surprisingly, when he was deep into alcoholism, I think. But it's a creature feature out in the woods with it's basically this gooey inside out bear monster.
Sounds awesome.
It's kind of cool.
Okay.
Anyways, Tom McLaughlin played the gooey inside out mutant bear monster. So, living the dream, basically. He had written and directed one horror movie, the only movie he'd written and directed, called One Dark Night, which had a very small release in 1983, but he was more known in Hollywood for these comedy screenplays that he had written, that he'd been shopping around town, and that producers apparently thought were pretty good and funny, but just not good and funny enough for them to actually want to produce. He came to the attention of Frank Mancuso Jr., who says, hey, why don't you write and direct the next Friday movie? And, he knew a good thing when he saw it, even though he'd only seen the first Friday movie at this point and didn't know too much about the franchise. He accepts it. He basically gets a pretty long leash. His one ironclad instruction is you have to somehow make Jason the killer again. So we end up with Jason Lives, 1986. The reason why this is a horror movie instead of a terror movie is that it starts with Jason being reanimated by a lightning bolt. And suddenly he's a zombie. He's a zombie monster. The main character is once again Tommy Jarvis, who was the kid played by Corey Feldman in Part 4, and then was aged up a little bit for Part 5. Even though Part 4 heavily implied that Tommy was going to become a killer, and then Part 5, the twist ending, actually made him a killer. Part 6 ignores that. The fun thing about these Friday twist last scare endings is that they kind of let the next movie decide whether they want to call that a dream sequence or actually something that happened, whether it works or not for the plot they're going for. The twist ending of Part 1 was obviously intended to be a dream, but they run with the idea that Jason is alive. And the twist ending of Part 5 was pretty clearly intended to be real life.
Yeah.
Tommy is in fact becoming the killer. And now he's just some handsome blonde dude who wants to kill Jason. Right away, one thing that I find really, really interesting about this movie is that they go gothic horror right from the start, right? Some of the opening shots in the movie are mist rolling over.
Well, yeah, they're walking through a
forest,
graveyard, right?
And rocking through a fucking graveyard. It has a pretty Universal Monsters kind of gothic horror vibe, and it's comic gothic horror as well. So totally different. Well, pretty different from the slasher movies that came before them, right? This is why I think it's a break in the franchise, because the earlier Friday movies, they're still in that classic slasher mold. These are still the offspring of Psycho in many ways, right? Whereas Part 6 feels like the offspring of Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman or something.
Yeah.
Like, we're getting silly, we're getting self-referential, and we're getting gothic horror rather than like psycho stalker terror. And I mean, whether you like that more or not is maybe a matter of taste. Will, what are your thoughts on Jason Lives?
I'm for it. If I had to choose live or dead, I'm for it. Let Jason live, damn it. I'm very fond of this sequel. It hits a real great stride of Revenant Jason. Like, he's got a great look. The movie has got a lot of self-awareness. It breaks the fourth wall, which it can be risky for movies to step into that type of territory, but this one, it's fine.
Yeah, that Ralph guy spoke to us, right?
Yeah.
The Undertaker, who's like, they dug up Jason. Some people have a sick idea of entertainment or something like that. Like,
yeah, and it's right to the camera. Like, there's
Yeah.
no reason
Yeah.
for him to do that. There's no diegetic form in which he's like getting away with that or telling someone like, no, it's to us. It's us sitting in the theater munching on our popcorn going, hey, the movie done spoke to me. But it's a very defined line to cross. Like, once you do that, you are accepting that
Your movie's fucked.
well, that you have to do a lot of work to then cross that line again to the other side and make it purely like, oh, it's all just on the screen. None of us are aware of what's going on. But our collective memory of the Jason films, a lot of that is encapsulated in this exact film. Like, when we think of it, or in any time it's referenced, people and all of us, the collective we, think of it as, Revenant, zombie, Jason running amok at a camp. We actually have like kids.
the only time in the franchise where there's actual campers at camp.
Exactly. This film almost is like the archetype that we then misremember every other film around it as being. Like, it's got, Tommy Jarvis, it's got the revenge story, it's got the resurrection, it's everything is kind of hitting its stride, and it's more fun for it. I don't know if you were planning on touching on this, but the really kooky manner in which one of the Jason actors was discovered.
I don't know this. Tell me.
Oh, lovely. One of the actors got hired because he was part of a nightclub act. And in the nightclub act, they would do this whole like setup, like, oh, if you do blankety blank thing, Jason might come and get you. And then the guy like disappears, and then he arrives as Jason is like the big punchline. And the producers saw this and thought, hell, this guy actually looks like a really good Jason. So they spoke to him after he's been doing this whole nightclub act.
I remember this.
Yeah, he's a restaurant manager. He's a big, 6'3", 250 pounds. It's kind of like when you hear about someone who's part of a cover band actually get contacted by the band itself.
Oh, yeah.
Like the guy from Judas Priest.
The Ripper.
So was that the first guy that hired as Jason? Because I don't have the names in front of me, but I do remember reading how because there's two people who play Jason in the movie.
There's two guys.
The first one, if he filmed like the daytime paintball scene, and when they showed the dailies to Frank Mancuso Jr., he thought he looked too fat and asked them to recast a different, less fat Jason.
That was the first guy. And then the second guy they got was...
Poor guy.
The restaurant
Too fat.
manager.
The restaurant guy was the second Jason.
He was the second one. CJ Graham.
I feel bad for the guy who was too fat.
Yeah.
Oh.
He went on to do a hell of a lot of stuff. He worked on Indiana Jones films, Bourne films, Spider-Man films, Mission Impossible. He's doing just fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So the like self-referential stuff is obviously a big theme in this movie. Not that there was never self-referential humor in Friday movies before. There was. Like, I'm thinking notably of in part 3, you have a moment where a character is reading a Fangoria magazine with like a Tom Savini cover article, and then she gets killed in a way that mimics the way that Kevin Bacon was famously killed with a Tom Savini effect in the first movie. So, I mean, these self-referential winks did exist, but they weren't such a big part of the material at all until this movie, which in some ways I think Jason Lives is Scream before Scream. Like, this is the postmodern slasher movie, the real first postmodern slasher movie, the one which takes riffing on the form and playing with the fact that the audience knows the setup and has certain expectations as like a part of the material.
Right off the bat here, when they're escaping the cemetery, like a woman and a man get stopped by Jason, and she goes like, there's a dude in the mask, we should turn around.
She says something like, I've seen enough horror movies to know that it's never a
Yeah.
good thing when there's
That's
a dude
it.
in a mask on the road at night or something like that. Yeah. So there's moments where the characters are explicitly addressing themselves to the audience's expectations with a big laudable wink. There's a lot of comedy. A lot of it hits, I think. Some of it does. There's a lot of attention displayed to comedy transitions, right? The gravedigger says, like, does he think I'm a fart head? And they transition to a chorus of children going, yes. You know, they do that a whole bunch in this movie. Like almost every transition is like some kind of joke. I don't love all the comedy stuff. I feel like the whole like executive paintball retreat sequence is not very funny to me.
It's not great.
It gets a bit cornball at times.
Though, I mean, what I like about it is that it's part of, I think, another theme of the movie, which is lampooning masculinity, too.
It seemed like they added this in like after the movie was already made.
It was actually one of the first things they shot because that has fat Jason.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, there is so much just making fun of masculinity, and characters like Court, the himbo, is kind of funny. But just all throughout the movie, generally, the male characters are shown as like less decisive and more cowardly, and the women characters are more like in control and assertive. They're having a lot of fun with like turning 80s genre movie tropes on their heads. Probably my favorite gag in the movie is that when they're showing all these kids tucking in for sleep, and there's a little girl reading Sartre's No Exit, which is that's a good gag. For one thing, it's just fun to imagine like a fucking 8-year-old girl reading existentialism. It's also, that's a play about people trapped in hell with no escape. The French title "We Close" is like the way that you refer to that genre of like murder mysteries that kind of inspired slasher movies. So there's a couple ways that makes me giggle. If this is the movie that people think of when they think of Friday the 13th, as you suggested, Will, that's something that I don't like because I'm such a fan of those earlier straight up terror movies, the pure golden age slasher movies. One of the reasons why I don't necessarily love Jason Lives is because I don't like what it did to the franchise. I don't like it turning Jason into a supernatural character necessarily, and I don't like it turning towards self-referential humor and away from the seriousness that was still present in the early 80s movies.
They had to try something new.
Absolutely.
Right?
We're number 6 at this point.
Yeah, they had to switch it up.
I'm saying that's not necessarily the movie's fault that I hold that against the movie. Like you say, I understand why it was time to switch gears and mix it up and give the fans something different. But man, fucking Fridays 1 through 4 are so dope. There's definitely things that amuse me, but also the way that it treats Jason itself. Instead of him being this kind of mysterious figure of terror that he is, like I mentioned, he's like the universal monster now. He's just like a lumbering meanie who just turns up conveniently. And that's kind of how he remains for most of the rest of the movies. And I find that less inspiring and interesting.
I think they were trying to make him scarier by being that way, but it made him...
He's not scary in this movie, though, at all.
Bringing him back to life with supernatural powers...
Yeah.
Maybe like, oh, now how are we going to kill him?
Yeah, but then to me, he's just become a movie monster, right?
Yeah. I just think people maybe thinking, how can we make him scarier? And I don't know, make him a zombie. make him the undead.
But there's a lot of cleverness in Tom Laughlin's writing. It is a fun movie. Oh, and the fact that it's like a Universal monster movie, I think that's obviously intentional. There's like a couple references to Frankenstein, and like there's a Karloff's delicatessen or something at some point, you know, like Alice Cooper's Teenage Frankenstein plays at one point. McLaughlin's making it very clear in his way, which is a very meta narrative way, that he's tipping his hat to the Universal monsters and drawing from that tradition rather than really drawing from the pool of Halloween, Psycho, and the first Friday. He's drawing from the pool of, I think, 30s and 40s horror movies more so, almost, while also kind of foreshadowing what will come when we get into the 90s and everything has to be ironic and self-referential. Sheldon, what's your take in general on this movie? I haven't really got a read on how you feel about it yet.
I enjoyed it. It was dumb, but I was entertained for the 90 minutes or whatever. The soundtrack, I love Alice Cooper, so I was pretty pumped with all the Alice Cooper songs throughout the movie. Yeah, we didn't mention the intro. The 007 intro, which like right off the bat.
Yeah, that is pretty fucking fun.
It's such a cool scene.
Yeah.
He has a weird lighting on him too, and it just looks so cool. So you kind of know what you're in for. You're like, this could be a fun movie, and it was, for me. The characters I thought were kind of shitty. Like a lot of them. Most of them.
Well, I think the new Tommy Jarvis is just bland to me.
Yeah.
Like, not that I'm in love with what they did with him in part 5, but at least he was like this emotionally conflicted character, and now he just seems like a bland, handsome guy on a mission.
Yeah. The paintball scene kind of it didn't do it for me. And there was a confusing kill at the end of that scene. All the three characters are standing next to each other and in front of Jason, and he swipes his machete, and then they're all dead.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of a big takedown. It is a bit lazy.
It's kind of like the Antonio Banderas Zorro movies, where it's like the PG Zorro movie and he keeps fighting like a million guys, but he just kind of pushes them away where there's his sword and they just fall out of screen.
It's kind of like when like a kill happens in Xena or something.
Yeah.
Where it's like someone gets hit by a blade. Not necessarily cut by, but they're like hit away.
A lot of the gags kind of fell short, but
some of the gags fucking hit too.
The final act I thought was pretty good too.
It had a fairly exciting climax, though again, like, my other issue is the way that they're kind of just pissing on what came before in the movies. Like, the fact that the one thing that can kill Jason, according to Tommy, who's just decided this, is the one thing we definitively know does not kill him.
Yeah, yes.
Drowning in Camp Crystal Lake, the thing that he famously did not die from. And also, like, another big just hand-wavy erasing continuity thing is that they clearly state in part 5 that Jason was cremated.
Maybe he was lying.
He could have been, yeah. I mean, if they wanted to explain that, I'm sure they could have, and I'm sure they didn't really care.
No.
Because what's the point of having a gratuitous, like, brief scene where somebody's like, it turns out that they actually bribed the coroner to pretend to creep, who cares? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Not as many people back in the day able to check and cross-reference things as readily as we can.
Still, though, bringing it back by a lightning bolt, come on.
So, I like the whole intro to this movie, and I like the whole outro. The middle was a little sketchy.
Okay, should we slot this into our rankings at this point?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'll slap it in there.
So why don't we start with you, Sheldon? I'm kind of curious to see where you put this compared to other ones.
I had a hard time. I had a couple arrows going everywhere with this one. I will put it right behind number 1. So I have 2, 4, 1, then 6, then 5, and 3.
Okay. Like I mentioned, I think some of my feelings towards this movie are maybe unfair resentment based on it being kind of a hinge point in the franchise for me.
Oh no. Are you putting it way low? Oh boy.
I'm putting it above 5. It's absolutely above 5, but it's not cracking the top 4 there.
Right below number 1.
Right below number 1.
Or way below number 1.
Pretty far below number 1, but also far ahead of number 5. Will, what do you got?
I'm gonna pop it at number 2.
Holy.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna part 4, then part 6.
We should probably actually mention for the first time Nightmare on Elm Street, because it came up in the production of this film. So first of all, it should be pointed out that the Nightmare on Elm Street movies were actually kicking the Friday the 13th movies' ass at the box office around this time.
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah, so the first Nightmare on Elm Street comes out in 1984, I believe. Directed, of course, by Wes Craven, who made his directorial debut with The Last House on the Left, which, as we mentioned, was a movie produced by Sean Cunningham. So these two guys' careers started out together. And the Nightmare movies were really popular right away. And the Nightmare movies were supernatural from the get-go, of course, which is one reason why, while they are pretty inarguably slasher movies, they don't slot into the terror movie slot that I was talking before, because they are clearly horror movies in the sense that they involve supernatural elements. And audiences were more into supernatural shit by the time we get into the mid-late 80s. We're deep into the Reagan era at this point. And it's worth just kind of hearkening back to when we were talking about the greatest movie summer of all time, 1982. Remember that a million fucking years ago? And how I was talking about how it was kind of this really interesting interim period between the new Hollywood period of like very modern, serious, and often bleak contemporary urban stories, and the coming wave of 80s spectacle movies. So we are now in that wave. We are now in the period where the studios have really reconsolidated their power, but also audiences really seem to crave comforting movies. They're really going in for things that are silly and or sentimental and or spectacular. The kind of gritty, hard-nosed, and often depressing realism that you got up until around 1980, 81 in so many of those Hollywood movies, that's long gone. And when we're talking about horror movies, those like harsh terror movies of the late 70s and early 80s, they've really fallen out of favor. And things like Nightmare on Elm Street, with their more spectacular supernatural elements, that's what audiences are really, really digging at this point. And this is very apparent to Paramount Pictures producing the Friday movies. So like Dream Warriors, which was out in, I think, 87, Nightmare 3, that made like more than $45 million at the box office. Compare that to the last Friday movie. Jason Lives made about 19 million. It was about 22 million for part 5. So the Nightmare movies are making about twice or more than twice as much money as the Friday movies are at this point. So this was the first time that Paramount Pictures reached out to New Line. New Line was a young studio that was producing these Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Paramount, an older established studio with a lot of clout. And they kind of tried to strong arm New Line into giving them the rights to use their character, Freddy Krueger, so that they could make a Freddy versus Jason movie. But New Line wasn't biting it. That fell off the table. But that was, of course, the seed that was planted. And for a very, very long time after this, people were trying to make that fucking Freddy versus Jason movie. When it was clear that wasn't going to happen, they moved forward with yet another Friday the 13th sequel, The New Blood. There was a new producer who was put in charge by Paramount of making this new movie. Her name was Barbara Sachs, making her producing debut, and by all accounts, pretty fucking gung-ho about this. According to the original writer, Daryl Haney, she said at one point that she wanted to make a movie that would win an Oscar, which, sounds fucking insane since you're talking about a Friday the 13th movie, but maybe not that insane when you consider that Fatal Attraction had just come out, and Fatal Attraction, which is basically just a really sleazy, grimy, shitty slasher movie, was nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture.
I like that movie.
So The New Blood, the original script was by Daryl Haney, as I mentioned, and it was rewritten by nobody fucking knows. One of my favorite little bits of trivia. The person who rewrote The New Blood is credited as Manuel Fidelo. Now, that's the name of Spencer Tracy's character from Captain's Courageous. Clearly a pseudonym. But to this day, nobody fucking knows who Manuel Fidelo really was, which is, of course, sparked rumors that it was some well-known writer slumming it who desperately wanted his identity hidden as, like he was a Mossad agent or something. Burn the papers.
It makes sense.
A forgotten Woody Allen script.
It was totally Woody Allen, absolutely.
I mean, what if the girl has powers and Jason just has to deal with that?
And directed by John Carl Buchler, who was a special effects guy for a long time and also directed a number of fantasy horror movies. He directed Troll and The Dungeon Master. So it's worth mentioning the plot of Friday 7, The New Blood, because this movie kind of really has a plot, more than almost any movie up to this point, I think.
Trying to win an Oscar. Yep.
It didn't win an Oscar, sadly. They were just fucking robbed that year.
Too many good movies that year, that's all it was.
Yeah, just robbed by, I don't know, Out of Africa or some shit. Movies that won Oscars in the late 80s were all really bad anyways. I don't know what it was. What won in 1988? I'm going to look this up.
I'm curious now. See who robbed this movie. 88? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, Best Actress Cher. Yeah, fuck, Moonstruck kicks ass. Okay, The Last Emperor. That's what won. It was The Last Emperor.
I've never heard of that. Does it have Sean Connery in it?
It's actually a pretty good movie.
That's a really good movie.
All right.
Yeah. But Moonstruck was better.
Oh, Moonstruck came out that year.
Broadcast News was also nominated. Actually, not a bad year, come to think of it. Anyways, back on track. Didn't win an Oscar.
Robbed.
The basic idea is that there's a final girl that has telekinetic powers so that she can actually square off with Jason. And honestly, I think that's a cool idea. To be like, here's a final girl who's not just going to run away from him, but is actually going to go toe-to-toe to him and do battle with him. And so the last act will be a battle, not a pursuit. I think that's cool. I like that idea. And so we're introduced to a character named Tina, who has telekinetic powers. And right at the start, we're showing how she kills her dad through telekinesis when she's a little girl. And then, flash forward to the present day, and she's returning to Crystal Lake because her creepy therapist, Dr. Cruz, insists that this is part of her training. When he shows up, she says, "Bad news, Cruz." And come to think of it, that would actually have maybe been a better subtitle for the next movie in the series than what it was.
I'm sure Manuel Fidelo pitched that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'll take a joke for that comment. That's pretty good.
Bad News Cruise, starring Walter Matthau. That's Jason's near-do-well uncle.
And then she brings Jason back to life by wanting her dad, who's dead in Crystal Lake, to come back to life really hard, and then I guess missing and accidentally reviving Jason instead.
I don't understand why she tried to bring him back to life.
Yeah, he was an alcoholic who was beating her mom, but she also killed him. So, I mean, I would understand feeling regret, even about killing an abusive dad, because you did kill a guy.
She sucks at her superpower then.
Yeah, no, she has bad aim.
because that makes sense.
At least she didn't like accidentally revive, I don't know, the dead sturgeon or something. I don't know how it works.
Any number of bodies Jason put in there.
Nobody knows how it works. Daryl Haney and Manuel Fidelo don't know how it works.
No.
But anyways, Jason's back. He's killing people again. And then, as I mentioned, we end up with a face-off between the two of them. And one of my favorite surprise endings of not just a Friday movie, but any movie. Because it's fucking hilarious.
It's so fucking dumb.
But it's amazing.
She zaps again. So her superpower is making dead people into zombies?
I guess.
And she sucks at it?
She finally brings back her dad. Just so zombie dad can burst through the dock and drag Jason down with him. It's an amazing twist.
Yeah. No, it's not.
I mean, like, obviously I have a ton of questions.
We're stuck on this movie for an hour, aren't we?
Is he like just like in an unconscious state? And is she just manipulating his body like a cordyceps fungus inside an ant? Or did she actually fucking revive him? And did he just come back to life and has total agency, total consciousness? And it's just like, I'm here underneath the lake?
Well, she zapped all the memories into him so he would know. Like, that helped me in being killed by Jason.
Okay, maybe, yeah. And thankfully, he wasn't just like, damn, I really need a whiskey. He was like, better stop this zombie from attacking my
Well,
my
he
daughter.
certainly was given that revenant amplification that Resurrection seems to grant characters in this series. Like, to propel yourself out of the water, I don't know how many of you have tried, vertically swimming and how easy it is to vault yourself out of a lake.
The zapping helped him.
Also, why the fuck was his body still there? Usually somebody drowns, you recover the body. It's not like it was hard to recover. He was like a couple of meters from the shore.
And not very decayed at all.
They covered it up.
Good old telekinetic Tina. So, the new Jason in this movie, I think, looks dope. I like the exposed bone rotting Jason.
Great Jason look. Absolutely.
It is a great look. And they take advantage of the fact that he is now a supernatural zombie instead of having him just dressed like a fucking toy army soldier. And I like the way he's introduced, like wading out of the water, filmed from behind with exposed vertebra at night. It's like a Godzilla introduction.
The look of Jason in this one is quite rad.
And I kind of like Zombie Jason versus Telekinetic Tina as a final act.
Yeah.
Oh my god. It was like 30 minutes of her zapping things at him, like TVs and telephones, running into a different room. He'll come in. All right, let's do it again. On and on and on. Until she fucking zapped her dad. Oh my fuck. This movie.
Well, you know what? This one, like I said, it has an actual plot. It has an actual like main character who's been like developed and has like a backstory and shit. I mean, it's not great. There's a lot of like weak points too. A lot of the other characters are not really well developed. All the other teens in the house next door are...
The kids are pretty lame in this one. Yeah.
Was this one rated at PG-13 or something?
No, but the thing is, the MPAA really fucked this movie over hard.
Well, the writers did too.
Manuel. But no, seriously, according to which source you read, either 7 or 9 times did they have to submit this movie to the MPAA to avoid an X rating. So I think at this point, the MPAA was really just picking on this movie because they were tired of Friday the 13th movies pushing the envelope. They had to keep cutting more and more and more out to finally get it down to an R rating. And it shows, right? Like there's so many kills where like the punchline is missing. Like when Cruz finally dies in the woods and Jason shows up with this, fucking chainsaw branch cutting thing. You hear it being revved first. He shows up and Cruz falls over and screams and you don't really see any blood. That's because they had to keep cutting the actual like muddy shots out of this. One instance where it actually helped, I think, is the sleeping bag kill, right? When Jason picks up a sleeping bag with a struggling girl in it and smashes it against a tree with all the ceremony of you like taking a bag of ice that you bought at the gas station and smashing it against the wall to break the cubes apart. It's a great moment, but they originally filmed him like repeatedly bashing the sleeping bag against the tree with like more and more blood coming out. And with the cuts that were obliged by the MPAA, they had to reduce it to just one single smash. And it's perfect like that. It's a perfect slasher movie kill for me because it's just like a singular instantaneous jolt of shock and comedy. Like just punching those two buttons, the horror button and the hilarity button at once. Boom, one bang, one crack. It's really funny. It's really shocking. It's a great moment. So that's one kill that was actually helped by the cuts. The other kills were kind of ruined by the cuts. And that's a shame, I think.
Yeah, absolutely agree. There's an extra coldness. And also illustrating his strength, because Jason's powers are definitely ramped up a bit in this one. I think this is the film that properly introduces his teleporting. Like, it's not something that's ever spoken about. I mean, film logic can only explain so much away, and he definitely disappears and reappears.
Who cares? The one girl can zap people back to life. Who the
I'm
fuck
all
cares
for it.
about anything?
I'm all for bad aim resurrections and lake dads, as I am for
Fucking
Jason
lake dad.
teleporting.
And the part where he gets lit on fire, they set a record by setting Kane Hodder on fire for 40 seconds to film that, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that was a crazy stunt.
Fucking awful.
Yeah.
Everything about it. There was not one good thing I found about this movie.
So I want to hear your ranking right away then. I want to see how close
Last.
this gets to the basement. Really?
Wow.
Okay.
There's nothing entertaining or fun about this movie.
You did not laugh out loud when Zombie Dad showed up at the end. Come on.
No, I was pissed off. I was like, what the fuck is going on? That's what I said out loud by myself and turned it off.
Okay, well, I'm curious to get a read on just how you rate this film.
Sure. One little extra thing that maybe gave it a bit of an edge to, that's just my own personal favoritism, is the fact that Susan Blue is one of the actors in this. She plays the mother. And I'm a big fan. And she's not famous for the Friday films. She's famous for voice acting and being a voice acting director. She's founded a studio and directed a lot of major animated shows and also appeared in a lot of animated shows. And so shout out to Susan Blue. This is one of the few times you actually get to see her face in a film. So with that, giving it a little extra edge, I'm putting it above 5 and 3. Yeah, I've got 4, 6, 1, 2.
7, 3, 5.
Yeah.
I put it ahead of 5 and ahead of 6, though it's not cracking my top 4. So it's leading the pack of the post first 4.
Yeah, we're moving on.
Yeah.
Let's go to Manhattan.
Yeah.
Let's go to Manhattan. Yeah.
Chapter 1. He adored New York City. He idolized it all out of proportion.
But only for like 15 minutes. First, let's go on a boat for a long fucking time.
Okay, so obviously we're talking about Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, 1989, the very next year, written and directed by a dude named Rob Hedden, who had worked on the Friday the 13th TV show. There was a Friday the 13th TV show, but it had nothing to do with Jason.
Did you guys watch that?
When I was younger, I tried to, but I don't know. I thought it was like a detective series. I really couldn't grasp or care.
I keep on like Amazoning it and then putting it in my cart and then taking it out.
It's probably smart.
There was an episode directed by David Cronenberg that I recently had like queued up on my watch list, but never got around to.
Oh, fuck. Is that why that idiot was in Jason X?
So, you know what? You already brought it up. Let's just zero right in on the thing that people always bitch about when they're talking about Jason Takes Manhattan. The fact that most of it takes place on a fucking boat and only the little bit at the end really takes place in Manhattan. And I get it. You know, people talk about seeing the poster or seeing the VHS case, and you've got the New York skyline, and you've got Jason hovering over it in his hockey mask, and it's called Takes Manhattan, and you expect a whole bunch of Manhattan shit from start to finish. My take is that a slasher on a boat is actually a really cool idea.
I didn't mind that at all. I love the setting of this movie.
think it's a cool setting, a cool setup, and I think if
Yeah.
you get over like what you thought it was going to be in your head, I think what we got is probably better than what that fucking whole movie in New York you're imagining would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I still wouldn't mind seeing a New York one, but the setting of it's fun. Nice confined setting on a boat.
The thing is, we get some like big, New York moments at the end. He emerges from a fucking subway and Times Square. Cool. That's nice.
A really
Do we
awesome
need
scene.
more of that? Do we? I don't. Like, the original script apparently had a bunch of shit they were going to film on the Brooklyn Bridge, on the Statue of Liberty, in Madison Square Garden.
So he's just a fucking tourist in Manhattan, eh?
Exactly. And
He's just hitting up all the tourists.
exactly. What, you want him to fucking slash people in the M&M store? Like,
Okay, I want that now.
But of course they couldn't do that because they didn't have the budget to do all that. But I think that movie sounds like it sucks.
It would be fun. He'd be taking pictures and having people painting him in front of the skyline. That sounds fun to me.
A caricaturist is doing it.
Yeah, that's what I'm
doing
thinking
his
of.
picture. He goes to Phantom of the Opera or something. I don't know. Fucking Woody Allen shows up.
Goes to Cats and knows all the words.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like that idea.
The Woody Allen connection again. See, I knew it. I knew he was the last guy.
Oh, Manuel Fidello.
Manuel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Close.
Yeah.
You
that's
guys
my,
still
that's
owe
my
me money
suspicion
from the
now.
last movie, actually. If you
Yeah,
could
what if he just comes home and I don't want it to actually be me. Rick Moranis can play me.
I've heard of hockey players slashing before, but this is ridiculous.
I think you'll get more than 2 minutes for this.
All right, so this movie had a bit of a bigger budget than any Friday movie before it. It was around $5 million. According to some reports, it swelled to about $10 million, which is, for a Friday movie is significant, though. They still had shortfalls. And of course, famously, most of the scenes that are supposed to be set in New York were shot in Vancouver. It's not quite as blatantly obvious as like Rumble in the Bronx, where like Jackie Chan runs past mountains and a Tim Hortons, but still a lot of it is clearly not in New York.
I just can't stop laughing about the earlier comments. The sequel is him just digging through his purse, mailing out postcards.
Just sending a postcard to Pamela's severed head. I made
So
it, man.
stupid. Okay, that's out of my system. I'm good.
One of my favorite behind-the-scenes stories involves the boat they used. They had to use a couple boats. The first boat they started using that was in BC, that was owned by a BC businessman who magnanimously let the crew use his boat for a fee of $1. But what he didn't tell them is that he had left the boat on the wharf for 2 years. And apparently there's this thing called wharving fees where, you have to pay for leaving your boat. And he hadn't been paying that for 2 years. So when the crew tried to use it, the people who were running the wharf were like putting muscle on them and forcing them to work at odd hours and like threatening them and shit. So they found another boat they could use in Washington State because there was some guy who had won a boat gambling. And he didn't really know what to do with this boat that he had won, so he lent it to the film crew. The problem was that apparently there are laws against just bringing a boat across the border unless there's like a reason to do so. Like, I guess there's boats in Canada that you could film with, so you can't just import a foreign boat. So they bought a bunch of sacks of potatoes and carried them on the boat so that they could tell the port authorities that they were transporting potatoes. So yeah, we're on a boat for much of this movie. Again, I think it's cool. It's kind of like Terror Train, the slasher on a train, but this is the slasher on a boat. It's a very we close. It's that closed environment where you can't escape, where he's creeping from one part of the ship to the next. Jason, who is very moist in The New Blood, is extremely moist in Takes Manhattan, just sopping wet all the time. He's like some creature that emerged from the deep sea. The characters are pretty strongly established, I think, in this one. The main characters, that is. Like, we get a surprising amount of backstory for Rennie, the final girl who wants to be a writer, and Sean, the ship captain's son, who, isn't ready to take control and doesn't want to let his dad down. There's a surprising amount of character development going on here. And the whole sequence is on the ship. I think those work pretty good, especially my favorite part when Jason hunts that one girl inside like the party room and it goes all disco with like disco lights and music and stuff.
Yeah. With Kelly Hugh. She was in X-Men.
And I mean, it should be pointed out, this is 1989. This is like the peak of battle days New York. This is like New York crime city at its peak. This is the point when
it was well represented in this movie.
It represents what the public perception of New York was at that time. And the city like went bankrupt in 1975. There's a point where the city could not pay like hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, and the banks essentially took control of the city. Like, a council was formed to run New York City, and 8 of the 9 people on the council were bankers, and they imposed austerity. So like suddenly firemen were getting laid off, teachers were getting laid off, social workers were getting laid off. And that's really the start of this period where we see throughout the 80s, you have increasing crime throughout the entire decade, which peaked around 91. But by 89, like, everybody sees New York as a place that's full of criminals and hardened, callous people who live among criminals. That's like the public perception of New York. And that's what we're seeing here. And I think that's kind of interesting if you like go way back to what we're talking about on Friday 1, how the summer camps were originally conceived as a place where people whose morals were corrupted by being in the city could go and morally correct themselves out in the woods. Here we have the inverse of that. We don't know where the kids come from who go to work as counselors in the early Friday movies, but the camp's in New Jersey. So we can kind of assume a lot of them probably come from New York. And now it's like the reverse. It's like the high school kids from the Crystal Lake area are going to the big city, going into the den of vice and immorality and bringing their Jason with them. They're like backwards murderous force. And it's like really tied into coming of age stuff strongly because of those backstories are all like very much coming of age backstories. It's like the hayseed coming to the big city, kind of Bildungsroman happening with a sopping wet murderer at everybody's heels. I find it satisfying and fun. I like the plot of this movie. I like the way it's structured.
Yeah, I like the plot. I like the ideas, but everything else about this movie was pretty damn bad for me.
Will, we need you in here. What's your take?
I gotta say, I'm not a fan.
It's bad.
I grew up with a very specific vision of New York City, and it was dark, damp, all alleyways. And I was kind of hoping for, like, you know, getting the weird vibes that I got from movies like Chud, where you get such a grimy, low angle of the city. Like they're literally like it's underground, it's weird networks of stuff in Hell's Kitchen. But just relishing in the grime, I feel like there was still more room to maneuver than they granted themselves. I don't necessarily want him going to Madison Square Garden and taking in a fucking Rangers game, but they could have used the whole labyrinth nature of the alleyways to make that sort of like a, you know, the kids getting lost in that environment, especially with the way they did it, this sort of weird fever dream of literal toxic waste, which that's a whole fucking topic unto itself. Why New York is flooded nightly with toxic acid. I get that they're really going
Every bin was just filled with it.
But if you want your like pseudo surreal dialed up representation of a grimy city as like reflected through the rest of the nation's consciousness, kind of it's doing that with that, like vats of like green goo everywhere.
Absolutely. And so that's the thing. I think this film fell short of being what it could have been. I agree with so many of the points. I do think that it has a lot more going on for character development. In some cases, some also just like, this girl wants to be in music videos. That's her personality.
And she's really sick at guitar. She's so sick at guitar, her guitar doesn't need to be plugged into anything.
Is it her music she was singing to? Like, what was it? She's just like, oh, let's just make a music video. I'm like, yeah, it's cool. We all pretended when we were 8 and 9, but like, what? Are you a musician?
She was a TikToker.
The time on the boat, there's so too many missteps there. The time spent, I would have loved more of the extreme set piece of New York that they created. I like the heightened version of Manhattan, just the pure grime. There's it itself. Manhattan is a nightmare. They should have lived more in it. There was a lot of potential there, and then it just kept stumbling on its own missteps. That the whole sequence of Jason starting as sort of a normal portly kid and then slowly getting deformed by the lake.
Oh, fuck yeah, that was dumb.
Like, is New Jersey also scum? And if you go in the lake long enough, you are just going to start getting deformed.
Okay, when we see like the pure kid Jason, that's kind of like a dream sequence, surreal stuff. I think that what they're going for is that a big theme is innocence destroyed. And it's almost like Pamela Voorhees' nightmare, right? Like her image of a perfect, innocent child who's corrupted by the world, which is what we're getting in this image of these kids from the country moving to New York. Rennie gets kidnapped and drugged and her boyfriend has to save her, which is like an extremely condensed version of like a coming to the city Bildungsroman. I think you have to read that a little surreally. These dream visions of him as like a perfect little kid are this fantasy of innocence itself.
Sure, yes. I can see that if that was just for the audience, but it's for a character and it's her visions. And so why would she care or bother to conjure a idealist Pamela Voorhees-esque picture of this child?
Her imagination was stoked by Stephen King's magical pen.
Yeah, there's just... I have a hard time looking past where it fails.
My other point that I want to muster in its favor is that there is some imagery which is like surreal and cool that I'm impressed by, like a sort of dream sequence where Jason pushes a hand through a mirror like a fucking Jean Cocteau movie. You know, there's like the where they're staring at a puddle in an alley and then suddenly there's boats on a puddle and we seamlessly transition into a flashback. And the rooftop boxing match, which is a scene I don't like, but has my favorite shot in the movie, where we get a POV shot of a spinning head tumbling off of a rooftop. This is some kind of cool, radical, surrealist filmmaking. There's only a few moments of that, right? I'm not saying it's a whole movie, but we get a sprinkling of some pretty exciting, imaginative imagery, which for me is just another spice that's enlivening it. I think that a lot of this movie's bad reputation has to do with people conjuring a movie in their head and pitting the two movies against each other.
They watch it again, though. After they watch it the first time and are disappointed, they come back a decade later, watch it again, and now they know it's not Manhattan.
Yeah.
No, it's still horse shit.
All right, how bad? Let's rank it. Go first, Sheldon.
Oh, boy. Yeah, there's not so many, but there's things I like about this movie. So number 7 had nothing I liked about it, so I'll probably put it right ahead of 7.
So does that mean it's behind 3?
Right behind 3? Far behind 3, though. Yeah.
All right, well.
It's right at the bottom.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Last place.
It's below 5, even.
Hey, don't hate on 5 all that much.
5 fucking sucks.
5 is enjoyable. It's entertaining.
So for me, it pole vaults over 5, 6, and 7. And does it crack my big 4? No, it stops on the doorstep. All right, so despite having a bit of a bigger budget than other Friday movies, Takes Manhattan was the lowest grossing movie yet. Barely cleared its budget, brought in about $14 million. Major disappointment. For Paramount Pictures, they kind of thought the writing was on the wall. I mean, slasher movies were kind of becoming a relic of the early 80s anyways. Paramount throws in the towel. They release the rights to Friday the 13th. They are done making these movies. Of course, that's not the end. So, New Line Pictures, which, again, produces Nightmare on Elm Street, they rush in to snap up the rights to Friday the 13th. Because, back in 1987, Paramount was trying to muscle them to give them the rights to Freddy Krueger. Now, New Line, this young upstart studio, they see their chance to fucking beat Paramount at their own game, pick up the Friday rights, and make Freddy vs. Jason themselves. It doesn't go that smoothly, though. So when they're trying to secure all the rights to Friday the 13th, they run into a hitch. It turns out that Paramount Pictures doesn't actually have the necessary rights or all of the necessary rights. We're getting into intellectual property legal bullshit here, but it turns out that some of the necessary rights still belong with our old friend Phil Scuderi and his business partners. Remember Phil Scuderi? This is the dude who he had a chain of theaters in the Boston area.
Oh, sleazy guy. Yeah.
And who had been kind of a behind-the-scenes shadow figure, hiring and firing people for the early Friday movies, an early financial backer of Sean Cunningham, who made the first Friday movie. Well, it turns out he's got actually the key rights. So New Line has to deal with him now if they want to finally make a Jason movie. And you know who gets wind of this? It's our old buddy Sean Cunningham. Sean Cunningham finds out that New Line is negotiating with Phil Scuderi, and he inserts himself into the process. So we haven't heard from Sean Cunningham since back when he made the first movie. And he stayed involved in the movie business, but wasn't exactly becoming a well-known director or anything like that. I guess he decides this is his time to work his way back into the franchise that he created. He presents himself as kind of a broker between Scuderi and New Line. And, he just has one small condition, and that's that he wants to produce the new movie. Whatever the new Friday movie is going to be, which is presumably going to be Freddy vs. Jason. That's why New Line got the rights. That's what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And one of the main reasons why Freddy vs. Jason doesn't work out is because Wes Craven, and remember Cunningham and Craven have this history together. They both started out together. One of the first movies that Cunningham produced was The Last House on the Left, which was Craven's directorial debut. Craven, who actually has become a celebrated, well-known filmmaker, he decides that it's time for him to go back to the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. He's invited back in. He wants to make something different with the Freddy Krueger character. The movie that he makes, of course, eventually becomes New Nightmare. When New Line finds out that Wes Craven wants back in and has these cool ideas for this project that he wants to do with his postmodern take on the Freddy Krueger franchise, they're going ahead with that. And Sean Cunningham's Friday the 13th movie, well, it's not going to be Freddy versus Jason. It's going to be something else. He has to figure out what it's going to be. And, Sean Cunningham, the guy who started the franchise, coming back with a new studio. Clearly, he's going to do something simple, straightforward, and classic, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
History has proven that.
Yeah, there's no reason why he would do something completely fucking insane that nobody even understands what's going on. Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, came out in 1993.
I love the poster of this. It's so
You know
cool.
what, though? Okay, so when people talk about, like, Takes Manhattan having a misleading title / poster, and I'm like, shut up about it. The movie was good. I get that more about Goes to Hell. Goes to Hell, this was the VHS case that I would be eyeballing when I was walking down the
It
horror
has
section.
flames,
Oh, yeah.
the mask, and a bug going through the eyeball. Right? Was it a snake or was it
It's like
that
a demon
creature?
worm thing.
Yeah.
That creature, right? Yeah, going through the eye holes.
So, you know what, like, obviously, as we've established, I think, at this point, the Friday the 13th franchise has a bit of a history of having misleading subtitles for their films. The final chapter was very much not the final chapter. Takes Manhattan? He didn't exactly take Manhattan.
He took it a little bit.
And both the writer and director of The New Blood have said that they have no fucking idea what The New Blood is even supposed to mean.
Yeah, no one knows what the fuck was going on in that movie.
But for me, the most misleading one is Goes to Hell, with that art that implies that Jason will be in hell. I expected a movie where Jason is, I don't know, fucking fighting demons or some shit, because that's what I thought was sold to me by the title and the cover
I didn't get
art.
that at all.
Oh, no?
No, I saw the trailer.
Well, I didn't see the trailer. I just remember eyeballing that VHS cover for a very long time, and it was so long before I finally got around to actually watching the movie. And, well, let's talk about the movie. So the director is Adam Marcus, who is buddies with Sean Cunningham's son. And the original script was by a guy named Jay Hughley, but Cunningham kept getting different people to do rewrites of the script even while it was being shot. And his meddling just didn't stop there. Apparently, approximately half of the finished film, as much as 43 minutes of the finished film, was reshoots.
Oof.
Also, so yeah, Sean Cunningham kind of seems like a weirdo. He has one of my favorite fucking insane director theories that I've ever heard. Cunningham has the idea that acting never really works as well as you want it to when you're directing, because actors always react to their cues too slowly. His solution was that film should be shot at 20 frames per second instead of the usual 24 frames per second, because apparently if everything is subtly sped up, then the actors' reactions will also be subtly sped up and the acting will appear better. This is Sean Cunningham's insane fucking theory, which he applied in the movie that he shot before. And even though he wasn't directing Jason Goes to Hell, he convinced Adam Marcus, again, his son's friend who was directing it, to employ 20 frames per second when shooting this movie. So this whole movie was shot slightly sped up.
So, what? I don't know what that means, though. Let's say the movie was 2 hours long.
I can tell you concretely that because when they had finished the film, they thought they had completed a 90-minute movie. Then they sat down and watched it and realized that they had completed an 80-minute movie.
Whoa! So it is okay. Yeah, that's a lot.
Because they had forgotten to take into account the fact that the runtime was going to be shorter because there were fewer frames.
I'm glad I asked.
I don't know. I just love that idea. It's so stupid. It's so stupid.
That's
Okay, I would describe the plot, but I can't. I don't know. Like, Jason is like, his black heartworm thing is infecting people and they turn into killers when they get the black heartworms
made out into their mouth.
And so the killer for most of this movie is a series of random people who are possessed by the evil demonic spirit of Jason. So the movie is fucking weird as all shit, and that's the one nice thing I have to say about it.
Yeah.
But I find it really obnoxious. Honestly, I find it really obnoxious. I find that it has vibes of Part 5 to me, in the sense that it's full of all these random characters who are just presented as really stupid and who just shout at each other a lot and then get killed. And just scenes that I find annoying to sit through, except instead of it being like built on a slasher plot, it's built around some weird supernatural shit that I don't really understand.
Yeah, I had a hard time like defending certain parts of Manhattan. The key part of the sentence there is certain parts. This one, I don't know where the fuck to like. I've heard people say like, oh, that face through the grate looked kind of neat. I'm like, that's not enough of a defense. There's not enough happening here.
There was a shitload happening. It just didn't make any goddamn sense.
Nothing good happening. Like nothing entertaining.
Oh,
happening.
come on. A lot of the gore was fun.
Okay, so Sheldon, I want to know what you think, because I know some people who are huge Friday the 13th fans who are big defenders of this movie. If I squint enough, I can kind of see the justification just because of how bonkers everything is and unpredictable everything is, but it doesn't work for me. Sheldon, give it to me. Are you a defender or a hater?
I don't think I'm either, but I was very thoroughly entertained throughout this movie.
Okay.
There's a couple scenes that were really, really cool.
Like what? Like what? Give me an example.
When the cop makes out with the one dude and gives him the thing, and then he like melts into the floor.
Okay, yeah.
See,
I
that was
like
cool.
I like the moment where like the first guy to be infected shaves the other guy, and
So,
you
yeah,
don't
that-
know what's going on. That's a good moment because you just do not know what the fuck is happening. Why is he shaving him?
And he's like tied in leather bounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, the opening scene where the coroner eats the heart, and you're like, what the fuck is happening?
The fact that it's surprising is an argument to its favor, I guess. It's fun to watch a movie and just never know what's going to happen. There's something to be said for that.
I was highly entertained watching this entire movie. It was fucked up and, not good. But, half these movies aren't very good. I like the cast, too. Like you were saying they were obnoxious or something.
I found everybody obnoxious, personally.
Yeah, you did. I had no idea what was going on with the sisters and babies and shit. I'd probably have to Google it. I don't know.
What's the
There
whole
is-
only a Voorhees can kill a Voorhees?
Yeah, where does all this mythology come from, though?
Yeah.
It's like they
Like,
just invent this weird...
Yeah, they invented it right there.
And the bounty hunter knows all this somehow. I don't...
He reads the book. They had the Necronomicon in there.
Why it would mention Voorhees in particular, I don't know.
Have you read the book? You don't know.
Yeah, there's some pretty good recipes in the back, actually. The Sudoku was really hard. It was really challenging.
Yeah, okay. So the movie's fucking dumb. I just enjoyed it. That's all. There's nothing good to say about this movie. I kind of enjoyed it.
I feel like those are two contradictory statements, but I understand what you're saying.
The kills and the gore were kind of cool. People who do hate it, like, it's not a Friday movie. Get the fuck over it.
No, that's fair.
Watch it for what it is. It's a fucked up, like, body horror movie or whatever the fuck you want to call it.
That's a good argument. Like, I like to be on team just because it's not your expectations. Don't hate it for that reason. Like, if it's complete batshit weirdness, then maybe you can enjoy it as complete batshit weirdness.
And I did.
We all agreed that we liked Halloween 3, even though Halloween 3 was batshit weirdness that had nothing to do with the other Halloween movies. But for me, this movie was just too grating to sit through, starting from the beginning. Like the stupid first scene and the credit scene, which just drags on and on and on.
I
Why?
kind of liked it.
It's been a long time since I first saw this film, and I'm still a little bit in denial and kind of shocked by the fact that this is not a Jason film. Like, only so many of them actually have Jason's name in the title, and here it is. It's the first thing you see. It's not Friday the 13th. No, Jason Goes to Hell is the name of it.
Well, there's also a boring legal reason for that too, whereas that in part of the earlier negotiations with Paramount, they wouldn't give up the title Friday the 13th.
Oh, I can see that. That's also why, because the main character of this film was also supposed to be Tommy Jarvis. I know Paramount pulled that.
That'd be weird, though. This is like the weird offshoot. This one doesn't relate to any of them, right?
It was supposed to explain the rest of them, but no, it's just its own weird thing.
And I like it as its own weird thing.
How much do you like it or dislike it? I don't know. You're giving mixed signals here, so I need you to slot it in.
Right below 1, ahead of 6. So in 4th.
Wow.
Okay, middle of the pack. Will, what do you got?
He hated this one, eh?
Yeah, this is my new king of the bottom.
Last?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
For me, the only question is, which do I dislike more, this or part 5? And honestly, I think I find this more uncomfortable to watch than part 5. I think this
Holy.
actually edges out part 5 as my new king of the bottom as well.
I'm happy 5 moved up, but I'm a little sad 9 is at your bottom.
All right,
Where are we going next here?
Well,
we're
we're going into space. Yeah, we're reaching the in space point of the franchise. So Freddy versus Jason is still not happening. So they're still going to do something different. And yeah, they put him in space. They put him in the future in space. They put him way in the future. How
2455.
It's like
500 years in the future. So yeah, Jason in Space, directed by Jim Isaac, who was a special effects guy, a pretty good special effects guy. He was David Cronenberg's special effects director in a number of movies. He worked on Return of the Jedi, Gremlins. Had directed one previous movie, which was a slasher movie, The Horror Show from 1989.
Like The House 3 or 4?
Is that I've never seen it. Is that a sequel to The House?
I think so.
Oh, that could be, because I think it was a movie that was produced by Sean Cunningham, who produced the House movies.
It's either 3 or 4. I don't remember which one it is.
Ah, okay.
It was produced by Cunningham, but I don't think it's.
Let me go check. I have the box set.
It was intended. No, he's gone.
Yeah, The House 3. Sean Cunningham production, The Horror Show.
Hmm.
There you go. It sucks.
This time, I mean, Sean Cunningham's still producing the movies, though the head producer is Noel Cunningham, who is, you guessed it, Sean's son. This movie was shot in Toronto, and they basically borrowed Cronenberg's usual crew. Basically the same production team that made, like, Crash and Existence, made Jason X. Cronenberg got a fun little cameo at the start.
But why, though?
He's been in movies. He was the villain in Nightbreed.
He's got a pretty decent acting resume, actually.
Yeah.
He's still doing it. He still turns up in movies from time to time.
He's good in Last Night. He's good in stuff.
He's not a bad actor at all. I was disappointed when he died. So, alien vibes for me in this movie. It's kind of like Friday/Alien. They're in a spaceship, and the revived Jason is moving from one section to the next section, and with a heavy dose of self-referential camp being ladled on, as you would expect from a movie that was made in 1999. Though it only got a release in 2002, it was on the shelf for a really long time because the new head of New Line kind of didn't like it and didn't want to release it. As like a sci-fi movie, it's less half-assed than I expected it to be. It's maybe like 3/4 of an ass. Like they have some like decent work on like designing spaceships and stuff. Not great work, but there's like, there's designs happening. They have like future fashion, which, looks a lot like late 90s fashion. But, you know what they say about 90s fashion. It comes back every 500 years. But, they put some work and some thought into the designing shit. Yeah, that was really bad. I'm sorry. I'm drinking for that. That was terrible.
I laughed for it, so I drank.
You've got one point where like a chick shows up in like pleather fetish gear, shooting guns and stuff, which was like a whole genre of movies around the year 2000, right?
3/4 of which starring Mila Jovovich.
Yeah, exactly. There were so many of those movies back then, and none of them exist anymore. They've all just been Mandela affected out of existence. You know what? Is it any good? Will, is it any good?
No.
Yeah.
Will? Yeah?
Yeah.
Are you insane?
Like, I mean, any good, sure. It's like, I mean, not to say it's full on good.
You know what just popped in my head right now?
Mm.
How much better this movie would have been. So it's Jason X in space. If he spent like 2/3 of the movie like getting to space, just like flying there. Yeah. Like, oh fuck!
Just on a.
He's on this little ship
on a
going
boat.
to space.
Some girl who wants to be the next member of Prodigy is trying to make music videos.
But I mean, it is Jason on a ship, right? It's just a spaceship rather than a water ship. But it's the same concept. It's the same idea. If you have Jason in an enclosed vehicle, we'll continue what you're saying.
Yeah, I jumped in. Sorry.
It's a movie that having the opinion of it and that it has some positive effect, I feel it could only exist now. It couldn't exist when it first came out. Amongst everything else going on, there's just a bit too much. Like the campiness doesn't quite read that well at that time. But now I can forgive. I can even be on board with the idea that he has to fight an android at one point and loses to an android who's all souped up and just jumped out of an Underworld poster. The fact that he becomes like Mecha Jason.
I believe he's credited as Uber Jason.
Yes. Yeah. Is into that territory of it's so fucking stupid at this point that I'm kind of into it. The fact that his machete wasn't a full-on lightsaber is a little bit of a letdown, but some decent kills in it. Some of it credited to just like some of the nonsense of the ship. Like, wasn't this the one that has like the guy lands on a big corkscrew?
You're screwed.
Yeah. Yes.
Like worse CGI than fucking Anaconda.
That's part of why it would be so hard to enjoy it. Well, like when it first came out, like the graphics are really hard to get past. But it's willfully stupid, and I have to hand it to them. Like they're taking a bit of a piss out of it. Like they're putting him in space. It's a whole different thing. It's like it has to be its own expression. That's not a jumping the shark moment. It's a horror in space moment. It's its own thing. So many franchises do it. Leprechaun, Hellraiser.
They were the last to do it, I think, right? I don't know, maybe the Sharks went there in Sharknado or whatever the fuck.
Critters definitely was in space by this point.
The thing is, the critters lived in space anyway.
Yeah, I know.
So who cares?
They just went back. We could just do an all space episode if people want. Only horror movies that wind up in space.
Yeah.
It'd be the worst viewing episode. That'd be awful to watch.
Yeah, that would just be an endurance test.
Leprechaun, what you doing there? Get out.
Yeah, just sitting there in one of those Clockwork Orange style chairs, people putting eye drops in. I can't take any more outdated screens. We have flat screens by this point. Why do they all have giant monitors?
I'll say some nice things about
Go
Jason
for it.
X.
Please do.
I think a lot of the line deliveries are like surprisingly good. Like I don't think the acting is as shitty as I would have expected it to be. It has that, like we talked about in the Animals Attacks episode, that late 90s end of history vibe too, which I like, even though the movie came out like post 9/11, but it was filmed before it. And it has that thing where that campiness of Jason feels like he's smuggling in some old and still significant idea of horror that we've just kind of glossed over, the way that they've smuggled Jason onto the ship. That end of history idea that these modern myths of progress are being attacked from within somewhere. It's camp, but the camp is smuggling something in that you don't want to be there. I don't love the movie at all. There's only so many lines of dialogue where like a character is getting sucked into space and they say, "This sucks on so many levels," that I can handle.
Oh,
Yeah.
Uber Jason, I think, looks like shit.
awful.
There used to be like a Mighty Ducks cartoon show where like the Mighty
Oh
Ducks
my
were like
God.
superheroes.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Uber Jason looks like the goalie Mighty Duck character
Oh my
a
God,
lot.
yes.
Yeah, this was torture. I can't stand CGI. I hate it. And this one uses so much and it, oh God. And you like the acting, I hated it. I hated all the characters.
Oh, all the characters sucked. There was like none of the characters were fleshed out. They were all just there. I was just saying that some of the line deliveries I thought were better than I expected them to be.
They weren't even that good. I mean,
No.
better than you expected, sure, yeah. We're watching
Yeah.
Jason in space. Fuck this movie.
Enough to put it all the way at the bottom of the pile.
Dead last.
Dead
Wow.
last.
Below 8.
So it's
Yep.
unseating Manhattan.
Oh yeah, it is.
Will?
Oh, this is tricky. I'm going to slip it behind Manhattan, but definitely above Jason Goes to Hell. Definitely better than that. And I consider it better than 5. So, I mean, 5 is probably going to be my grading, honestly.
It's definitely surpassing A New Beginning and of course my last place, Goes to Hell. Next on my list I have 6, so that's where it stops.
Right above
So
5.
it's below 6, above 5. Yeah. It finally happened. It wasn't until 2003, but they finally got the Freddy vs. Jason movie off the ground that New Line had been working towards for a very long time. Apparently, over a period of 10 years, New Line spent about $7 million to develop 18 different scripts
Wow.
for Freddy vs. Jason.
This is what boggles my mind. And this is the script they picked.
This is what they finally ended up with. There were so many ideas that were being batted around.
You could have done anything rather than this, what we got here.
And you read about some of the things that were being considered. There was one that was OJ inspired that was going to put Jason on trial. There's one that involved, this one got pretty close to being in the final one, where there was a group of Freddy cultists called Fred Heads that were obsessed with Freddy. There was an idea to retcon Freddy into Jason's history and say that Freddy had been a counselor at Camp Crystal Lake who like molested Jason as a kid.
Oh, that's gold.
That's not bad, actually. That's
That's
kind of good. So the script that they finally ended up greenlighting was surprisingly written by 2 newcomers named Damian Shannon and Mark Swift. Their first screenwriting credit, it had been given a rewrite by David S. Goyer, uncredited rewrite. David S. Goyer is a writer who I honestly kind of like. He's known for like a lot of comic book movies. He did the Blade trilogy, the third of which he directed. He wrote Batman Begins. And probably his best work is that he wrote Dark City, which is a nice, cool philosophical movie.
Neat movie, yeah.
The director they gave the script to was Ronnie Yu, who is a Hong Kong action horror guy who had previously made a Hollywood horror movie when he did Bride of Chucky. And the budget was big for this one. They put it at a budget of about $30 million, which was much bigger than any previous.
10 times bigger than a lot of them.
And they spent a lot of marketing. Apparently, they spent about $25 million just on marketing for this.
I remember those two squaring off in a ring or something on MTV, like Freddy and Jason.
I think I saw this. Yeah, like a weigh-in.
Like they had a weigh-in, and they
Yeah.
had all their stats, like kills and
Yeah,
like a lame weigh-in.
It was pretty weird and cheesy. The
Yeah.
shit they did to try to sell this movie. Yeah, they tried to work it pretty hard, and it worked. It was a really popular movie. Actually, it was quite successful.
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, people were fucking begging for this movie for 10, 12 years at this point.
Yeah, it's the most successful since the original Friday the 13th movie. It pulled in over $100 million. It was a hit.
Despite all that money, it fucking killed both franchises.
So the way they arranged to have them come together is that Freddy is manipulating Jason to come back to life and to kill for him on Elm Street to get people afraid of him again so that he can build up enough fear to come back to life. And that's basically the setup.
So, where was this in each series, do you think? On the intro, they showed highlights from all the Freddy movies, and it went only till Freddy's dead. They didn't show number 7. So that's where it landed here, but for Jason, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say because the chronology does get fucked up. Jason Goes to Hell is already kind of not following the earlier chronology, and
I guess it doesn't really matter.
at this point, both characters have been Mickey Mouseified. They're like more cultural icons than they are characters with like a history. They were there at a certain point in their history. They're more like just a character that can be brushed off and thrown into a new setting. And that's something that the movie really takes advantage of. They're being squared off, not as two characters as so much as two cultural icons, two recognizable figures. I mean, it's very much a movie of its time. It's very 2003. And that's one thing that kind of endears it to me. It's like a time capsule of that era. You know, you've got like guys at like a rave in a cornfield being like, there's like new metal music and stuff. And they're like, this Everclear is kicking my ass. This is,
Jesus.
It's very, very 2003. There's a Columbine reference. There's a George W. Bush reference. One of the girls from Destiny's Child is in it.
You can say her name.
Okay, it's Kelly Rowland.
Say her name.
It's all right. I'm tricking you, motherfucker.
Yeah, gotcha.
That's good.
There's a lot going on in this script too. Like it's busy. There are things happening. You know, this whole conspiracy in the town and the changing relationships between Freddy and Jason. And I don't say that negatively. I kind of like that it's busy. I find the dialogue is kind of fun and punchy, which I credit to David S. Goyer. I definitely don't credit it to Shannon and Swift. And I'll tell you why when we get to the next one. Personally, I find it a fun movie. Not as a slasher movie, because it's not really a slasher movie at all, but as like a battle of two cultural icons that gets pretty Looney Tunes. It basically turns into a Looney Tunes movie at the end where Freddy is like Wile E. Coyote trying to catch the Roadrunner. And there's like just a series of gags. And I like the way that Freddy is like this city slicker con man and Jason is like this silent bumpkin from the country. It feels like just like two American icons clashing on the stage of the year 2003. I like the explicit George W. Bush reference where the sheriff starts telling people to like not criticize his decisions, that they're not pursuing the wrong enemy. They know what they're doing. And when he does that, we see Bush's portrait in the background. The whole thing of having like the older generation suppressing the dreams of the younger generation, it's of its time and it has something to say, I think. I like the Bush era themes. I like the Looney Tunes nonsense. It doesn't really fit into either series, but at the same time, it has so many references to the other series that I enjoy. I like that we actually get a flashback to Jason at camp for the first fucking time as a little kid. You know,
oh, right. They did do that. Yeah.
They do actually throw down some roots.
I didn't like the way Freddy looked in this one. He looked stupid. He had like weird teeth. His like whatever the makeup they used, he just didn't look right.
Yeah, I don't like how Jason has like weird dangling hairs hanging everywhere.
Oh, I liked his scraggles. I wrote down, Freddy looked dumb, Jason looked cool. I liked his scraggles. I don't know, whatever.
Will, thoughts?
I really like the soundtrack. I have a copy of it.
Speaking of time capsules, yeah.
Yeah, it's an absolute little gem of...
Any Alice Cooper on it?
No.
Ah, fuck.
But it's a fun little transition. It's a perfect little stamp of where metal was changing from the NU new phase into kind of a revival, like the new wave of American heavy metal and European metal was coming back, and like actual guitar solos and such. So you can kind of see a nice little flow in it. To me, that's the film's best quality. I agree. There is fun to be had. You can't help but expect a certain kind of camp from it. It does take itself rather seriously, and that works in a lot of parts. Like there's some genuine, believable trauma with some of the nightmares that get conjured, like the boy whose brother died, and he's not sure if it was a suicide or by Freddy, and his nightmare was a very jarring one. I like the concept of Freddy losing his power, so he has to create a substitute to try and give him some credit. I think that's a really good idea. I think that's a great launch point. There's some parts that I really am into, and there's other parts that are just, they really miss the mark for me, and I find myself so taken out of the film. Like the CGI caterpillar takes me out.
That looked like shit.
Fuck.
It looks so bad. It's so cornball. It was a huge challenge. It was this big sort of a millstone sitting around the neck of New Line Cinema and all these other folks trying to figure out how the hell could we actually pull this off. And they mostly do.
They had 10 years to think of a fucking script.
I'm glad they went with at least one of the good ideas. The whole Freddy losing his powers, him becoming forgotten. And there's a certain ghostliness to that, like, you know, something forgotten. Other horror films have touched on that type of horror where it's something that's so forgotten that it's scary that things start happening. You're not even sure what they could be leading to.
Yeah, I also like the way that the adults in town have suppressed the knowledge of Freddy. Like, on one hand, they're really evil because they're literally suppressing the dreams of the younger generation and hiding knowledge from them. On the other hand, they actually are doing this to protect them. And I like that kind of dynamic where it's not clear to what extent the adults are being evil and to what extent they're being beneficial. And if they could actually tell one from the other, I think that theme in the context of like being a teenager under George W. Bush is like, it was timely. It had a certain potency at that point, and it still reads well, I think.
I'm trying to recap how much I hated this. Freddy also, like, how many times did he fucking cackle in this movie? Yeah. Like, that's all he did. Yeah, and then like the final act where they're actually fighting was unbearable.
Like, I didn't mind the actual combat itself. I thought there was some good brutalization. Like,
well, there's also an angle where it makes sense as a vaudeville movie, and that's where I'm going to punch in that interview. Okay, so I'm talking with Dr. Stella Castelli with the University of Zurich English Department. Well, we're going to talk about Freddy versus Jason a little bit. Dr. Castelli, you wrote a piece that I really loved about Freddy versus Jason as a vaudeville movie. Tell me about that. Why is Freddy versus Jason a vaudeville movie to you, and our vaudeville double act more specifically?
I've always liked horror movies a lot. A lot of people ask me why I love them so much, and I've always maintained that I like them because they're funny. Of course, some of them are funnier than others, or let's say more grotesque. To me, Freddy versus Jason, because I'm going to say humans, because Freddy and Jason are immortal, or they're really parenthesized. And it's really about the spectacle of them performing, of them fighting. And then ultimately, I think, because neither one of them is going to die, we know that, right? It has to be something else. And we watch it because we want to see them perform. And because Freddy is also such a witty character, they really come forth as a vaudeville act.
What makes vaudeville vaudeville? What does that mean, really?
Okay, vaudeville, originally it's a French term. Originally, this was more of what we now would consider a circus act. So one would have different acts of the curious, the carnivalesque, the spectacular in any way, shape, or form. And then American vaudeville, then usually we have a double act. So we have Laurel and Hardy or things like that, where usually it's two performers. They work off of a dynamic, and their goal ultimately is to be funny, to entertain the audience. The vaudeville aesthetic has fast paced wordplay, gags, and physical humor. And it's this physical humor which also ties into the clownesque. So the figure of the clown is a part of that screwball, slapsticky way of inciting amusement is also a large part of the vaudeville. Now, when we have two people, usually one of them is more superior and one of them is more inferior. So there is this hierarchy between them and they work off of that. I just thought that with Freddy versus Jason, we really have that. And we, of course, have Freddy, who also is the first one to talk. He's the puppet master. He's the film also references that. They say he's the one pulling the strings. He's the one in charge, and Jason then becomes the sort of more physical, bodily, taciturn counterpart to this comedic duo. But both of them are necessary. I'm not making a statement on either one being better or worse. Both of them need to be there in order for this to work.
What do you think are the characteristics of both Freddy and Jason that play into this idea of them being a double act?
Okay, so with Freddy, we have this very sarcastic, ironic character. I am obsessed with the Elm Street franchise. I love it. He really maintains that stance throughout. So he is more of a, I'm going to say, intellectual comedian, or he will work with irony, and he will engage with the audience that way and pull us sort of on his side and be like, the inferiority superiority thing. Whereas with Jason is somewhat sort of just there, and he has his machete and he doesn't say anything and he just clobbers, and wherever you put him, you can throw him into Manhattan, he'll kill a bunch of people there. But what is important with him in terms of being humorous is that he has that clown-like body, because his body is so unkillable, and they also work off of that in the final half hour of Freddy versus Jason, because the clown also has that. The figure of the clown sustains inhuman bodily violence. He's not made of human flesh. He's of this clownesque material almost. And Freddy has such a hard time killing him. He can't. Ultimately, he can't. But he also, at some point, says, "Why won't you just die?" And he's so exasperated at that moment. And again, I thought it was so telling that it's not about the humans in that film anymore. It's about those two and performing that double act. I think you could only do such a film because we have these two franchises. You have to have two characters that the people already know and are familiar with. The same with a double act. At some point, we know what we sign up for, right? And I think you can't have two Freddys and you can't have two Jasons in order for the vaudeville dynamism to come into play.
Jason versus Michael Myers would not be very funny at all.
No, because no one says anything.
Yeah.
Because Freddy brings him back because he's being forgotten, right? His whole problem is that Freddy's being forgotten, and if so, he brings back Jason, his ally.
He's almost like some old performer who's been forgotten by his audience and thinks he needs to team up with another famous performer to...
Yeah, it's like a Madonna move.
Yeah.
So we have a lengthy scene at the end where they're just on this construction site and they're just battling each other. Because Freddy is physically inferior, right? So he has to use gadgets, whereas Jason is just, again, he will react. He will just react to being attacked. And it also feels like Freddy just becomes some sort of nuisance for him. And it becomes this circus like act. Freddy ultimately dangles upside down from a rope, and it becomes so grotesque and so absurd. So it's not about either or winning so much, it's really about the dynamic between them. The final image, Jason is walking out of water and he's carrying Freddy's head. And I really liked that in terms of the vaudeville aesthetic, because we have the head, the brains of the operation, the more intellectual Freddy, but he is carried by Jason. So he needs the physical, the bodily clown.
Freddy is kind of that Wile E. Coyote character, it seems,
Yeah.
where he's coming up with these crazy plans, and then we laugh when his plans just don't work out because the other guy just kind of plows through them. Yeah, no, it's interesting to think that the audience is kind of on Freddy's side a lot of the time because he is the intellectual one, but maybe we like seeing him fail too because it's funny to see the more intellectual guy's plans fall apart.
Absolutely. I mean, it's also, we have, if we think of Buster Keaton, for instance, so a lot of this early screwball comedy is very, very physical. And these people also got hurt a lot. So there's also this cruelty in producing a humorous moment. I find it fascinating that we have a lot of the humorous in horror and that we have a lot of horror in comedy.
What's going on here?
This conniving guy keeps running against the implacable idiot who's a sidekick. And that dynamic is what Freddy vs. Jason is tapping into. Because where we are at this point in the franchise, they've both been around so long that they are kind of just these comic figures almost more than they are like scary villains at this point.
Yeah, it's true. It's like seeing two mascots from cereals fight in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the Trix Rabbit will finally get his revenge on the Lucky Charms leprechaun.
You know, one thing that they apparently came pretty close to doing was doing the Clue style ending where you would have multiple versions of the movie with different endings and different theaters would get different copies of it. So you wouldn't know
who won.
Yeah, exactly. Like there'd be a version where Freddy definitively wins and there'd be a version where Jason definitively wins and you don't know which ending you're going to get when you go into the theater. Clue did that. The Clue movie from the 80s.
Yeah, with Tim Curry.
Yeah. I would have dug that. I think that's a really cool concept.
That's kind of a William Castle type of idea.
They also had considered endings where Pinhead would show up, or Satan himself would show up. The original script by Shannon and Mark Swift actually had Tommy Jarvis returning in the third act. Apparently it was David S. Goyer who took Tommy Jarvis out of the script because he thought it didn't work. All right. Should we slot it in?
Sure.
Okay, well, I think we've got an order established at this point. Sheldon?
I'll put it below number 3, but ahead of 7, 8, and X.
I'm kind of glad that 3 is rising on your list when you're so against it in our first recording. Not rising because you like it more, but just getting pushed up by the force of the pile of shit beneath it. Will, I've been getting mixed signals from you, so I'm curious to see where you actually put this.
Oh, the soundtrack is very high, but the film itself, I'm just putting it snugly above Jason Goes to Hell.
Oh, I like that.
So second last.
Yeah, it's second last.
I'm not putting it that low, as you've guessed.
I'm going to guess you put it right ahead of 8. That's what I'm guessing.
Close, but I don't put it that far. I put it right behind 8. I'm going to put it between close. 8 and 7. I think Takes Manhattan has a lot more going on for it, but I'm fond of Freddy vs. Jason. All right, I've got my last beer open. I'm ready to get to the finish line.
All right.
Oh, what's left?
What's left? Just one more. One last entry. All right, so there never was a Freddy vs. Jason sequel, despite some talks of there being one. And the last movie we have to talk about, the most recent Friday the 13th movie, was a remake.
Which killed the franchise. Because this is the longest we've had since we've had another one, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 12 years at this point. It came out in 2009.
Almost 13 years.
So remake time, which was not that surprising at this point.
Was this a sequel to the first one?
No.
No, it's a total reboot.
No, you didn't rewatch it, did you?
Fuck no.
Good call. But it's a total reboot set in the present day. They kind of take elements of 1, 2, 3, and 4.
And Wrong Turns 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah. I mean, the whole movie is a wrong turn.
Ooh.
There was a lot of remakes of classic like 70s and 80s horror movie happening around 2009 when it came out. And Marcus Nispel, who was hired to direct this, had done one of the most successful ones. He did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, which I have not seen and don't necessarily intend to see, but was surprisingly successful. That remake made a lot of money. This guy, Marcus Nispel, he's directed 5 movies. 3 of them, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Frankenstein, Conan the Barbarian, are remakes. So that's just what this guy does. We'd already had at this point remakes of Texas Chainsaw, remakes of Amityville, which both of those were produced by Platinum Dunes, a company that Michael Bay founded or co-founded. And it's the same company also produced the Friday the 13th remake in conjunction with New Line and also with Paramount. Paramount comes back into the fold because they owned boring legal shit. They owned the rights to the story elements of the original films, whatever. But we'd also had remakes around this time of The Hills Have Eyes, Black Christmas, a number of the movies that Siskel and Ebert hated, When a Stranger Calls.
No, take a drink. You said you wouldn't bring those guys up again.
My Bloody Valentine had a 3D remake around here.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet. I'm kind of curious about it, though.
Nah, it sucks, don't.
Okay.
Did I say Black Christmas? There was a Black Christmas remake.
Don't they just keep on remaking that every year now?
So it was time for Friday the 13th to get a remake. And the script they used was a script by Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, the same guys who wrote the original script for Freddy vs. Jason before it was rewritten by David S. Goyer. And watching this movie, I just say thank God for David S. Goyer, because I think he must have saved their script based on the evidence that we have from the remake. It's a movie I don't like. This is also of its time, but it's of a time in like horror movies that I don't like. We're in the torture porn period, kind of right after like the Abu Ghraib stuff came out and it became like public knowledge that America was torturing people abroad. Suddenly we get this wave of movies that are kind of fetishizing torture, which I want to... I'll have to take a drink for this, but I almost want to go Siskel and Ebert on the torture porn movies.
What year was this garbage made?
2009.
Okay.
So, the Saw movies had been going on for a few years at this point. The Saw movies started in like 2005 or something like that. The reason why I connect the Friday remake to the torture porn movies is mostly because there's one scene where like a sleeping bag with a woman in it is hung over a fire and roasted.
Oh, they tried to recreate some bullshit scene from number 8, I guess?
Number 7. But it's wildly different. Like the sleeping bag killed in number 7 is one bang, like one shock of horror and comedy that just happens in one split second. And that's why it's so good. Whereas a prolonged, like 3-minute moment of somebody screaming in agony is not the same animal. And I don't have time for...
Oh, fuck. Yeah, this guy set up traps all over his place, right?
Yeah, he had booby traps.
Oh, this movie sucks.
He's like this very competent hillbilly torturer.
Yeah.
And that's what Jason is in this movie.
It's all coming back to me now.
Yeah, so
holy moly.
Number one reason why I don't like it is I don't like the torture porn vibes that this movie is giving off. Like so many horror movies that are coming out around that point, I find them kind of sick and I don't enjoy watching them. It's not the same mode of like the kind of thrill and comedy of the 80s slasher movies. It doesn't look good to me. It's like murky and super saturated in the visuals. The actors are all like blandly attractive, toned LA model types. And I literally had trouble telling them apart because a lot of them just looked the same.
All the girls look the same.
And the guys, I mean, there was a couple of guys who had like different skin tones so you could tell them apart.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like the guys too looked the same. That's it. I don't like it. I find it bad and dull and grim and stupid. Somebody else tell me what they think.
Fuck this movie. This movie is awful.
Concise and to the point, like an initial sleeping bag kill.
When remakes come into play, this is near the worst. I might actually put this below Rob Zombie's bullshit remakes.
Oh, I would. I absolutely would. Because Rob Zombie's movies, there are movies that are an expression of like...
he's trying something new.
He's doing his own thing. Like he's got his own worldview and I don't necessarily always like what he's doing, but it feels like a guy's vision. Whereas this movie just feels like fucking boring paint by numbers bullshit.
This bullshit movie where...
like this is nobody's vision. This is just shit. Will, do you have anything nice to say about it?
The opening had a scary pace. Like if it kept on with that, it would have been a lot more effective.
The pre-credit sequence, which is a third of the movie.
30 minutes?
Yeah, like it just leads up, like it's got a certain intensity that's like, okay, all right, fine. Some of the kills were well shot. The rest, incredibly overly shadowed. I could not agree more about like the leading actors. Like it does tip into that other side of relishing in torture more than it ought to.
Didn't have the spirit of any of the other ones.
Totally.
Yeah, there wasn't much fun to be had for sure.
No.
What the fuck is Jason wearing in this movie? It's kind of hard to tell with like the super saturated dim visuals, but it looks to me like he's wearing like a bathrobe and an undershirt. He's like one white Russian away from being the dude. We're all eye to eye on this, I guess. For me, it's fitting that this is the last movie we're talking about. It highlights for me how good the 80s slashers could be by the absence of everything that made them great. This movie is just a dreary gravestone marking the place in the culture where the great 80s slashers movies once stood. Where those movies were human, were colorful, were complex, way more than critics at the time gave them credit for, where they were rich, fascinating movies. This movie truly is dreary, cruel, and grim. It shows through contrast what we used to have. That's the one good thing it does. Okay, so compared to the other movies that we have also lambasted as piles of shit, where does it stand? Let's start with you, Sheldon.
This one lands at the bottom of that pile of shit.
Really? Will, where are you ranking it?
Yeah, I have two films just jockeying for the bottom, like they're both trying to outshit each other right now. So it's either this one or it's Jason Goes to Hell. And I mean, I don't know. They're both pretty fucking bad.
Come on, this one's last. Come on.
Tampering. There's a flag on the play.
You know, I'm keeping Jason Goes to Hell at the bottom.
Oh wow.
Although I'll have to do a recap because I've played with the numbers, despite you guys saying I shouldn't.
Yeah, for me it outcraps Jason Goes to Hell. This is the bottom
Whoa,
of the pile. This is the bottom of the
yeah.
pile for me.
There we have
Absolutely. It's the only place it could be. With Jason Goes to Hell, I can at least squint at the screen and enjoy the fact that it's fucking insane. That is weird as shit. Friday the 13th, the remake, is not weird. It's not anything. It's just a dumb, crappy movie. And that's, for me, that's the worst sin of all.
Yeah. Oh, I think we owe a drink. We agreed on that one.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm going to
gonna
finish
open
my glass I got here. Okay, so we have our final rankings. Let's recap them. Okay, I'll go first. I think I've got this straight. I'm a little drunk, but I think I've got this straight. I had number 1, Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D, specifically the in 3D version. I know I've underlined that before.
No, you definitely did.
Yeah, okay, you're right. I did. Number 2 is Friday the 13th, the final chapter being Part 4. Number 3 is Friday the 13th, Part 2, really good movie that just edges out number 4, Friday the 13th, 1980, the original movie. I could switch around those 4 a little bit if I wanted to. For me, the first 4 are the unbeatable golden run. Number 5, I have what is for me the best of the non-original 4, Takes Manhattan. Seriously underrated movie.
That's your guilty pleasure.
Number 6, I have Freddy vs. Jason. Number 7 is Part 7, The New Blood. Number 8 is Part 6, Jason Lives. And then we're getting into this, we're getting into sketchier territory. Number 9, I have Jason X. Number 10, I have Part 5, A New Beginning, which sucks. Number 11, I have Jason Goes to Hell, which sucks.
Watch it again.
And that's the end of the list. Okay, number 12 is the remake.
We're good there.
Who wants to go next?
Well, we'll keep the same order.
I think I jumped the line there. We were doing. I was.
Oh, really? You did? So I will go. Yeah. Number 1, my favorite Friday movie is number 2, the introduction of Jason, and then number 4, and then number 1, and then I went number 9, number 6, the fun, goofy number 5 after that, the shitty 3D number 3, and then after number 3 is just complete garbage, which I'll never watch again.
You still got to rank it. Come on.
Oh, Freddy vs. Jason, and then I think number 8, and then maybe number 7, and then X, and then we're done. And then remake.
All right, we'll go.
All right, so I'm sure your graphics are you're going to see them dancing around here because my list is not consistent.
I've been writing them down as we went, so we'll see.
All right, so here's the list as it stands right now, and it's changed within seconds, thanks to I switched to a very very strong beer line from Lake of the Woods. So number 1 got Friday 4,
Of course.
absolutely. Number 2 going with Friday 6.
Yeah, you kept it there, eh? Good for you.
And dig it. Number 3, we've got the original Friday the 13th, Pamela Voorhees. Number 4, we've got number 2.
Nice.
In my number 5 position, I have put Friday 7. Fun to be had.
I like that.
At number 6, I have put number 3. Number 7, I've put Manhattan. It has moved up.
Whoa, what? Come on.
Because then, number 8, that's where I've put number 5. At number 9 position, I've got Jason X. Number 10, I've put Friday 11 versus Nightmare. I don't know.
7?
Nightmare 7, something. Either way, that movie that produced a really cool soundtrack. And then, to nobody's shock at this point, lots of changes. Then I'm going to have Jason Goes to Hell at number 11. And yeah, the bottom of the pile's got to be the Joyless remake.
My frustration with you fudging with your list is overcome with my pleasure that we all agree that that piece of shit is the
Like,
worst.
everyone's put out some pretty passionate responses to things. It's like when you're tuning a guitar. You play that first string, you play the second string, and you wait for the harmony to hit in tune. And when your frustration hit, I'm like, yeah, no, that's in G. I hear it. That's I'm in harmony with that. In fact, I was taken back 10 years ago to remembering what the films were like then.
It was not a good time for horror movies
It
then.
was
It
not.
really was not. All right,
Good list.
Okay. You know what? I kind of like all 3 of our lists. I think we've got 3 fun lists.
Yeah.
This has been a pretty exhaustive covering of the entire franchise. I hope you listened to it on Friday the 13th, or if not, anytime you listen to it, it became Friday the 13th.
Something magical happened.
This has been a ton of fun.
Mhm.
I've really enjoyed researching this and, of course, recording this with you guys. It's great to be back.
Totally.
We're back, baby.
We'll be back with another episode at some point, and even sooner if you subscribe to us on Patreon. We've got some bonus content coming your way. I'm Dylan. That's Will. That's Sheldon.
Ya bang.
Shh, shh, shh.
Thanks for listening. Maybe we'll come back with something a little more obscure, something a little more out of left field, a little more unexpected. Who knows what? We'll see soon. Have a good night. Keep looking behind you.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop it.
Shh, shh.
The hollow voices whisper the cry farther down the line. There's a reason why. You've tried before, but you can't buy it. No matter what you do, the darker side of the night burns like a fire for the wasted life. And there's no way you can fight to show some respect.
And we don't get another one for, I don't know, how long has it been now? 12
12
years?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, almost 13 years.
Yeah, we did that already.
We'll delete one of them out of the podcast.
I don't think I will.
Oh boy.